Wonderful. All right, so let's get started. So to everyone, thank you, all of you speakers, for joining us today. This is the third in a series that was launched by Ahead of the Curve and Reimagine Group to take a moment to pause and reflect on some of the critical sectors during what's happening in this global pandemic and how we can reimagine some of these sectors changing post the coronavirus. So I'm very excited today to focus this particular session on education. And before doing that, I wanted to thank Educate Me and Christine for co-organizing this webinar. It's a very important one, and we're very excited to have this conversation. We only have about an hour, so I'm going to ask everyone again to be concise and brief with your comments so that we can also take questions from the audience. And to those who are watching, if you do have questions, please write them in the Q&A box. And towards the end of the conversation, we'll be pulling on or choosing some of the questions to present to the speakers. So I like to use data. Everyone who knows me knows that I like numbers. So I just wanted to, actually maybe a better thing would be for me to take a step back and introduce the amazing speakers that we have with us. So we do have joining us, we have Caitlin Barron, who's the CEO of the Luminos Fund. Thanks for joining us, Caitlin. You're here with me in Massachusetts, so I feel a little close to you. Deema Bibi, who I've known for many years and have enormous respect for, CEO of Injaz in Jordan. We have Hamdi Tabbaa, who's the co-founder and CEO of I Abwaab, based out of Jordan. We have Madhav Chavan, who's co-founder of Pratham in India. We have Vicky Colbert, who is a legend, executive director of Escuela Nueva in Colombia. And of course, last but not least, we have Mohamed El Kalla, who is a partner and Ahead of the Curve, but also CEO of CIRA. And we have Christine, who is the co-organizer, who I mentioned earlier, who is from Educate Me. So moving along, just to focus on some key numbers that have happened during the pandemic, we have over 1 billion learners, people in school who have been affected by the pandemic. Over 70% of total enrolled learners have actually been put out of school. 168 countrywide closures of schools since the pandemic started. These are some pretty astounding numbers. Hard to think about and hard to imagine, but I just wanted to pose a question to all of you very quickly, and I'll perhaps call on a couple of you to get this discussion started. This is a great moment, and for years we've been talking about the need for education reform. We've been talking about issues related to access to education, issues related to quality of education, issues related to those who are in remote areas who can only dream of getting access to education. Is this a moment to really take a step and reimagine education as a whole across the world? Are we really going to see a huge shift in how education is delivered and what education looks like post the coronavirus? And I'm going to pick on Deema to take this one first.
Thank you so much, Dina. Lovely to be here with you all. So this is, I personally think this is the greatest opportunity we've ever had to reform education. It is our chance to address all the challenges, all the problems that we have been talking about for so long now, whether it was access to education or quality of education or equality. If we end up just utilizing technology to upload the things that we have now, the curricula that we have now, or even end up creating new curricula the same way that we did develop the previous curricula, then we have lost the greatest opportunity.
Thank you, Deema. Caitlin, I'd love to move to you. Do you think this is a great moment to reimagine? What is the opportunity here?
Well, as someone who leads an organization focused on children who are kept out of school, we find ourselves at a unique moment of, I think, real potential for extraordinarily broad-based empathy. Essentially, every parent on the globe currently finds themselves in the situation that the parents in the communities we serve have been in for many years. And as I think has been said in the discourse, and nothing could be more true, we are all in the same storm, but not in the same boat. And so what we know from past crises, that we ourselves at Luminos responded to the back end of the Ebola crisis in Liberia and schools being closed for a full year. What we've seen in Liberia in the past, what we've seen in other communities, is that the majority of children will pick back up their studies with some degree of learning loss, but that the most vulnerable in every community will be forever left behind. And what we know from the latest research from the World Bank is that potentially as much as $10 trillion of future earnings will be lost by the loss of education we're experiencing today. And so I think the moment of opportunity is that moment of expanded empathy and generosity and appreciation for exactly what we've lost and what it will take to come back.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. Mohamed, I wanna move to you because you're the largest private sector owner of schools in Egypt today, and overnight you literally had to go virtual. And that's been a fascinating experience. We know it's been a fascinating experience because we haven't seen or heard from you since this all started. So I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts about education moving forward, and what have you experienced since the pandemic started, specifically within your schools, but also within your university?
Thank you, Dina. Good to always talk to you. Been quite some time. I mean,
you've been busy.
Yeah, definitely. And you know me, I'm always a very pragmatic person. So I mean, I'll tell you how do I see things practically. First of all, I have this huge sense of pride in everybody working in the education field, because I think this industry for a very long time was assumed by a lot of people to be a very monotonous industry, not that able to change, not moving very fast. But I think educators taught the world a lesson about how you change things in very few days. I mean, the best industry across the globe that actually managed to change and adapt quickly was education to a large extent. And I think it has been an amazing experience. We had done a lot in Egypt, basically, to start to move. We have been investing in edtech for quite a long time. And I think a lot of education institutions did, but I mean, everybody was waiting for the right moment to really go mass scaling. And I think the fact is that this moment gave us an ability to mobilize all of our teachers, all of our learning resources, or actually our bread and butter at the end of the day, to really deliver a service on ground, which I think have been successful to a large extent. So transition happened much faster than anybody could think. There is, at least if you take a look at a lot of industries, there is a stability currently about how people are getting an education. But there's two lessons learned from here. Are we able to do it? Yes, we're able to do it. Are we able to access children? We're able to access children. But education is much more than just delivering a lesson online. And personally, I believe that we need, through consensus, to arrive to a point about how we're able to really especially approach younger generations. I mean, if I would say, I would look at any student above grade 6 going up to university, I see their outcome have not been affected that much going forward with the online experience. I'm very cognitive of the shortcomings specifically for younger ages, kindergarten 1 to grade 6, specifically because education engaged a lot of social experiences that is detrimental to their experience growing forward. I mean, there's a lot of debate on this going. Transition have happened, but I think we need to arrive to some form of a blended process, specifically for younger ages, going forward in the coming period. I mean, as people are now openly discussing about how to live with COVID, since I think we're coming to a realization that there is no miracle medicine coming tomorrow. I think the discussion about how we can specifically look at this younger age and try to minimize the experience and making sure to maximize on online learning and offline learning at the same time is going to be the heart of what educators will be discussing in the coming few years. That's my take now.
Thanks, Mohamed. I'm going to come back to you with a follow-up question, but I wanted to move to Christine, because Christine, you've been you've been seeing what's been happening both at the private sector side and the public sector side of education, but also what is happening within community schools and within those schools that were created by organizations like Educate Me or Tawasul in Egypt that were built in very remote areas of Egypt to serve those who, as Caitlin mentioned, are most vulnerable. What have been the implications of going virtual, both within public schools and community schools in particular, who don't necessarily have the resources or the agility to smoothly transition?
Hi everyone, I'm very delighted to be on this panel. And well, Dina, I think that first of all, on the public schools, teachers panicked a lot at the beginning, and all of a sudden they found themselves isolated from their schools, isolated from their students. They found themselves having to adapt to technology and also having to use the platform in order to be able to reach out for the students, which they of course have found very challenging, while also handling parents and students at a time that is already very challenging of its own. So I think, for example, us at Educate Me, we've had to cater for their psychological needs. We've had to cater for how they would be able to manage the change, how that they would be able to handle themselves and the parents, while also, of course, how would they be able to use the platform that was created by the Ministry of Education. From our experience, from our past experience, usually the use of technology and technological interventions in public schools with educators has not been proven to be very successful and was met with very high resistance. However, during the COVID situation, we found that some of the teachers were actually very much more encouraged to start and use the technology. They were much more actually wanting to do extra effort and step up to their game and be available online. So, so for example, we even saw small groups of teachers who are old in age, but went to cafes around the corner to be able to actually access and be there on our online interventions. And the fact that they were empowered to handle the situation and handle and be able to use the platform has had very high impact on their motivation and also on their self-esteem and their role as an effective role of them being teachers in a very critical stage in the history of education. And so while of course technology and access to technology and access to teachers and students, every teacher and student through technology remains a challenge, I think that at least for the public schools, I think it's definitely a silver lining that the barrier to entry has of course decreased. However, there's still a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of technology and infrastructure. As for community schools, I think it's a bit different because community schools are smaller in size. They're also more decentralized, and usually students and teachers are usually in the same community, and therefore more decentralized solutions were easier. So for example, in our own community school, our teachers managed to come up with very innovative ways to be able to deliver offline toolkits to the students to help them on their literacy and numeracy and also on their social emotional learning. We've also managed to divide the teachers on the students to split them up and be able to follow up with them, whether by phone or by WhatsApp for those who have, or by Facebook pages for those who are there. So I generally think that in community schools, there is slightly a better opportunity because of the fact that it's more decentralized and smaller in size. However, again, technology, of course, remains a challenge in contexts like Egypt, and especially in underprivileged areas.
Thank you, Christine. Vicky, I'd love to move to you because I think we've talked a little bit about how this may open up opportunities for access, but it's the question of quality and the ability to provide a meaningful educational experience is still up for grabs, I think. And you have spent your career working on developing a pedagogy that really puts students at the very center of their education experience. How do you think this digital transformation and this virtualization of education that I'm not sure we'll be able to retract will impact the quality of education, and how can we innovate and rethink maybe perhaps elements of your pedagogy to move along with what's happening with the virtualization?
This is it brings both challenges but also opportunities. And in our case, it's a moment of opportunity because it really forced to change the learning paradigm and to really be focused on child-centered. And also on the role of the teacher as a facilitator and mentor. We were working on this for ages, and I think this is an opportunity where this is already taking place. For us, I think the challenges are more pedagogical, not so much technical, even though that we were working mainly with rural isolated areas where there's no connectivity. So our self-paced learning guides, step-by-step pedagogy, printed learning guides, teachers are reproducing them and children continue learning in their homes with their parents because they have the self-paced learning guides, which are like a hybrid between a textbook and a workbook and the guide and the guide and the guide of the teacher. So we had to really think of cost effectiveness. So all children are continuing to work with the self-learning guides. They do the follow-up through their telephones and through their WhatsApps because there's no connectivity in these remote areas. We do have an online campus, but it's still in Spanish. Now for us, this is a challenge to have it also in English, but mainly for the teachers, where they can bring down all these adaptations. It's called Nueva, which means renew school, renewal of new school, of Escuela Nueva. So it's a lot of challenges, but it's also a great opportunity because it really forced to change the learning paradigm and to change the role of the teacher.
Thank you, Vicky. Madhav, I'd love to move to you because I think what's happening in India is also fascinating, and you've been leading a lot of work in the education space, specifically with regards to access and providing quality education to again, those in remote areas. What is happening in India, and how do you also think that we can use this as an opportunity not only to create greater access, but to find new learning paradigms within that framework?
So India has a bit of everything. So from a digital device or digital access thing, I would divide the country into 10%, 40%, 40%, 10%. 10% have just about everything. From home, desktops and laptops at home to everything else, access to the internet. 40% have access to internet via Android phones. 40% have cell phones. So 90% of the population has cell phone access, and 10% don't have even that. Now, all this, when the schools stopped functioning, they responded, as Mohammed was saying, that some people went into the online education. Some were prepared and some were not prepared, but at least there was an interaction with children. Nobody asked the children whether they actually wanted to learn or not, but they were all pressed to work because the schools had to do something. And these school systems, the government school systems and so on, started sending materials on WhatsApp and so on and so forth. So as Mohammed mentioned, we've done many things, inputs have gone, but what the outcomes will be is not known. I just wanted to bring this also, because I think people have realized that this is not going to replace schools. We will go back and the schools will be there. The schools will be there for a number of reasons. They are a part of the economy. Also, the school is the biggest daycare facility that anybody has. And if you don't have schools, you know what happens at home. Kids are there all the time and you don't want them. So partly, but education is also a part of their function. But the school does give a very important protective institution in the society. So I don't think this transformation or whatever flirting we have done with, and I use that term quite deliberately, with the digital technology, is going to last as a permanent feature. Not the way people were thinking about. But certain features of what we've learned in India I think not just our organization, but I think even the governments have learned, is going to remain. And we'll have to now take the opportunity to say, how will the school system or the learning system get modified? For example, we went back into the technologies of the 80s and the 90s and started thinking of using radio and television. We are running a program right now in a large population where there is a radio program. And I used to do this in 1989, excuse all the young people in on this show. 1989, it was called A School Out of School. And so we send now we're sending SMS to the population, and we are running a radio program saying, did you get the SMS? Did you see this lesson? And so on and so forth. So we're trying out completely new, different things. Now the question is, how does this work in the future? Whenever, as they say, all this is over and the schools start reopening, what will happen? I think everybody will just want to go back to school. It's such a relief for everyone. The kids want to play with their friends and so on. So the biggest concern will be not education, but the safety of the kids. The second thing is that it's not going to be smooth sailing. You'll probably go back and forth. Somebody's infected and then you shut down the schools and so on. There's uncertainty in the air. But I think two features that have come to, has become a major experience is, as somebody pointed out, parents are now know that I have to take responsibility, and their involvement is going to become an important part of school education, which we neglected earlier. So the part, and this is something that we've been saying all the time, and I'm glad there are community school workers here and also on. So that it takes a village to educate a child has to be emphasized. It's not just the school isolated from the society, but the community and the parents are a very integral part of the child's upbringing, which is ultimately what education is all about. And so that is the first feature, and how to integrate parents, and even training of parents is going to be a useful thing to do in the future. And the second thing is technology. The flirting that has happened now can actually point directions in the future. We don't know how the economy is going to face. We are already hearing that a lot of people who had access to the internet are not renewing their internet fees. And so they may have cell phones, but they're not going back on the net because the data costs a lot, or at least it's costing more than they can afford. The third thing is, with the economy going down, the question is, how are the children going to react? A lot of children in private schools. India has a large proportion of children going to private schools, affordable as they are called. That's about 37–38% of all of India's children go to private schools. How many of these will remain in private schools is not known, because the economy has taken a big hit. People are unemployed, and so on. So education and what we are doing cannot be considered only from the education point of view anymore. It will have to be looked at from a much more rounded perspective. For example, the goals of education. A large proportion of young people are going back into agriculture now because they don't trust going back to the urban economy because they were thrown out. You've seen stories of migrant workers in India walking back home 800 kilometers and so on. So there are going to be deep repercussions socially, and these will in turn affect education. So digital is clearly one part of it. But I think there's much more to consider in the child's education. There's worry that they'll be dropping out, and we may need to start being vigilant about that part.
Yeah, thank you, Madhav. And I know that I want to bring Caitlin and Deema back into that conversation, because I know they've been thinking a lot about issues of equality and how to ensure that nobody's dropped out. But before I do that, I really wanted to give Hamdi an opportunity to speak, because of everyone in this amazing group of speakers, he was the one who started an actual startup that works on education in Jordan. And you know, I've been working in entrepreneurship and innovation space for over a decade now. And from where I sit at MIT, where I'm also the executive director of the Legatum Center for Development and Entrepreneurship, we've been talking a lot about how this will be, what we'll be seeing post the coronavirus will be a huge surge in startups in the education space and in ed tech. But Hamdi, you were one of the first players first people to enter the space, and you've been working also very, very closely with the government throughout this whole process. I'd love for you to share your thoughts with the audience, and it seems you have quite a few friends here as well watching. I'd love for you to share with the audience, what was it that motivated you to start your company, and what do you think will happen within the edtech space moving forward? Will we be seeing a lot more entrepreneurs move into this space, and what might that look like?
Yes, thank you very much, Dina. I was actually going to start with that. Like the thing that excites us the most as a startup is the ability to provide access to students across, and to kind of neutralize the effect of geography and income. And this is what got me to start Abwaab. It actually started off with me getting an executive online course with Harvard, and I felt that I was fortunate enough to get that, and I realized that you can really, with the power of technology, and thanks to my experience with Uber, I saw what the impact that technology can have on different industries such as mobility. I realized that we can have a very large impact on huge numbers of students through technology. So that's honestly what drives us the most. And this taps onto the issue of access. I'd like to acknowledge, and I'm very aware of the fact that there are technical challenges with students not everyone having a smartphone or internet bandwidth. Having said that, we believe that the best and the most efficient way to get the highest quality education to students in remote areas or even in urban places where they potentially cannot afford the best quality education is through technology. We were very lucky and fortunate enough to be able to work with the government only 5 weeks after we launched to provide online classes for students in Jordan during the lockdown. The result of it was that we had over 1 million students coming in and learning from our platform, which the team worked day and night to put together. The experience, obviously, this is only the beginning of it. And Mohamed mentioned over the call that it's not only bringing the lessons to students, it's much more. And this is what we're set out to do. It starts off with providing students with really good content, high quality teachers, upgrading, empowering the teacher to use the latest technologies to deliver the best message possible. And then it goes a very long way from there. Our long-term vision is to use the power of AI and machine learning to enable students to have curated learning paths and curate and learn at their own pace through the power of artificial intelligence, because we have to acknowledge as well the fact that not all students have the same learning ability and learning pace. So this is what we're set out to do on a very long term. But on a short term, we're here to provide students with access to the highest quality education possible through technology. One more thing on the access piece is that I'm going to revert to Uber again, but the growth of Uber and Careem in the region also paved the way for a lot of startups to grow. People became tech savvy to a certain extent. A lot of people own a smartphone. A majority of the population does that. So this allows, and this basically brought technology into households. So it paved the way for edtech startups to grow and enter households to do that. And for the ones that are really not able to do it, we're already working with the UN agencies, including UNHCR, UNICEF, and the UNESCO, to extend whatever support is needed to really remote areas where students don't have access to internet.
Yeah, thank you, Hamdi. Just a quick follow-up. Are you seeing more young people in Jordan enter into starting businesses in the education space?
Yes, and I think this pivotal moment for EdTech will encourage a lot of young startups to jump onto the space. The problem, as several people on this call mentioned, it has existed for a very long time. Now is the best opportunity for us to have as much impact as possible. It's a very tough problem and it's not easy to solve. A lot of people are going to try to do it. We'd hope to see as much success from different startups as possible. We're also a very collaborative tech community, and you would see a lot of us founders pinging each other. There's Atif from Teacherly who pinged me at the beginning of this call. Different model, but we kind of try to collaborate and share knowledge as much as possible.
Excellent. Mohamed, I want to ask you a quick follow-up, because you are actually in the private sector and you've been investing in education for a very long time. Do you see your company potentially starting a separate venture capital fund that would invest in edtech to solve some of the future problems that will emerge with what we're seeing in this virtualization of education and the use of technology moving forward?
Yes, Dina, actually started 4 years ago. I mean, we backed the fund NFX Capital. I've been investing in some of these startups, as you know, not only looking at Egypt, looking at different parts around the world. And I mean, I'll tell you something, and I'll be quite clear on this. We have always seen the potential of this becoming a mainstream service line, let me call it this way, but from a different angle. I mean, there was a big debate, and I'm building a lot of what they've been saying, and there's been a very big debate about the ability of educators and the organic educational systems to adapt to a huge growth of population, specifically in countries like Egypt, India, and around the world. I mean, and let me tell you here, I mean, if you take a look at the Egyptian pyramid of students, as I like to call it, at our grade 12 this year, we have 800,000 students. At our kindergarten one, we're 2.5 million. So, I mean, when we talk about an educational system that's triple the size at the bottom, then we have a problem in terms of expansion by brick and mortar. We cannot continue to build schools to absorb students with the numbers of the population growth around the world. And from this angle, we started 3-4 years ago, invest in EdTech as a support system to go forward. I personally, and I speak on my own point of view, I believe the future is for blended learning rather than 100% online service, because the element that schools provide for the economy, as you maybe rightly said, for the experience of parents, for engagement, have to include some sort of social engagement. I mean, look at all of us. We have our tech equipment, we have our access, we have everything. But I don't know a single person who's not gonna go out and spend probably weeks outside once this thing is over. So, I mean, we have learned that social engagement is much bigger for us than anything else as humanity to a large extent. And that's why I believe the form of blended learning is going to be the way we can access further service going forward, building on the experience we have now, because as exactly Hamdi have been saying, we have been lagging, waiting for the moment when people believe yet some education can be done online. So educators have to figure out how to create this blend going forward, not only to serve the existing, but the coming generations basically who need of seats. And this is how I see it from a pure also business investment angle.
Thanks, Mohamed. Deema, I have a few follow-up questions, and then there's so many questions coming in from the audience from everywhere in the world. It's amazing. Chile, India, Pakistan. Deema, you and I have known each other forever, and you've been working on partnerships with the private sector and transforming education using alternative means for years, and you've been one of the biggest advocates for education in the Arab world and developing skills required to prepare our youth for where we are today, right? So we are essentially in this new knowledge economy, virtualization of the economy that we've been talking about for years, but we hadn't prepared for. What do you think is next? How are we going to, if we take Mohamed's model and what Vicky talked about and what Madhav talked about, and we really start thinking about developing pedagogies and moving to a more blended learning way of doing things, what's next for the Arab world, which is a region that has not only issues of access, but even those in school are lacking the skills required to enter the job market?
Yeah, thank you again, Dina. Just a very quick building on what Madhav has said. I totally agree. Schools are not going to disappear. They're part of the economy, at least for the coming probably 100 years. They're needed for parents to work. They build social skills, etc. But I also totally agree with Mohamed. Blended learning is the way, and absolutely. And there are different methods and models for blended learning. I will link this with answering your question, Dina. I think the point where we start is why is education needed? And if we agree that we that education systems and schools are needed to equip young people with the skills that they need to live, happily live and succeed in a constantly changing, dynamic world, which is going to be their world much more than it is ours. Then we talk about skills. So in order to achieve that, what skills are needed? And we've been talking for the past 20, 30 years about the 21st century skills and learning and life skills and all that. And we understand that there are a set of skills that are extremely needed today more than ever, whether these are life skills, including resilience, creative thinking, problem solving, adaptability, all these social, emotional skills are extremely important. Things like kindness, being balanced as a person, etc. So previously we were talking about IQ and it moved to EQ, emotional intelligence. And now we're talking about DQ, digital skills, which is another important set of skills we need to address. Digital skills, including coding and VR and all that. There are actually 27 competencies today within the digital education. There's also entrepreneurship education. They do need to know how to capture opportunities and create different paths. If one fails, move to the other and accept failure, redefine failure, etc., and so on and so forth. Of course, we still need science and technology and engineering and art and math, but we need to deliver them in a different way, develop them and deliver them in a different way. And this takes us to the how, which is absolutely active learning. Learning has to be much more engaging, much more interesting, much more fun, much more, it has to inspire curiosity in them. And blended learning is, as we said, the way. And there are different models of blended learning. There is rotation model, there is the a la carte model, there is the flex model, the enriched virtual model, etc. And every environment in every country, every model fits certain environments. Not on all countries would be suitable with a specific model. Education also has to be very flexible, more flexible and more personalized. The education system have been structured and designed as if the student's life is stable and predictable, and it's not. They assume that students go to school every day with the same level of mental ability and social level and emotional level, and this is not the case. And this is an opportunity to change all that. And one last thing I want to add to this, the whole thing, is the who would do what. COVID-19 has proved that public-private partnership worked. And what Hamdi was saying is spot on. People like Hamdi, young entrepreneurs, startups, jumped on this opportunity, took advantage and partnered with the government, and they provided solutions. The government could have not done it on its own. So now there is a shift in the role of the government, of the private sector, of startups and young entrepreneurs, but also a huge shift is needed in the role of teachers. They need to become facilitators. Counselors need to become more like mentors. The admin role of the admin and the management, etc. So it's as we learned, you and I, in Harvard, to think beyond the building, not the box. So education is not the school. We need to think beyond the schools, the whole ecosystems, the whole environment. It's the why and how and where and who, etc. And I think this is the way. We cannot treat this looking at just one side. Everything is interrelated and very much connected.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. And I think that's summarized in what Matt have said earlier, which is education takes a village. It's not just about the school, it's about the parents and the policymakers and the private sector and civil society. And, it's not just about the physical infrastructure of a school. And I would love to quickly ask Vicky again to comment, because there's so many, I'm getting so many private messages asking for you to perhaps give your comments on where you think blended learning may fit in within a pedagogy like the one that you have developed, and how you think we can take that forward. Vicky, you're on mute if you're...
Sorry. Here.
Go ahead.
Okay, listen to me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Learning has to be conceived as an activity, not a place. So this is so crucial at this moment, and especially to concentrate more on the essential skills for the future of learning. You know, the learning to learn, learning to take initiatives, learning to lead processes, but especially learning to work in teams. I think this is the most important 21st century skill we need. And I think at this moment, I know the school, the physical place is an opportunity for socializing, but at this moment, I really want to highlight all these dimensions, because what we are seeing now, we have a combination of printed learning materials. Our self-paced learning guides, step by step, are so crucial. They're dialoguing guides that usually take place in school, but here children are dialoguing with their parents at home, step by step. This is why I said the challenge is pedagogical, not so much technological. But here again, we have a combination of using the cell phones, because where there's no connectivity in rural isolated areas of Colombia, the cell phone is extremely crucial at this moment. And we're also combining with radio. Colombia was a great leader in the region, in Latin American region, with the radio. So just yesterday, I said, oh my God, I hear I'm talking to so many rural teachers in this remote part of Colombia through their local radio, through their local community radios. So it's a combination of all, not only the new technologies, but also the old technologies. So we're at this moment combining all of them. Printed learning materials, cell phones, messages, radio, and for those that have the wonderful opportunities of having computers and having online learning, that's wonderful. But it's also a very small percentage. So at this moment, you know, all of a sudden we're changing the learning paradigm, and we're focusing on the student as the learner. And this is so crucial. And the new role of the teacher, we've been talking about this for ages. So these things are starting to take place. And I think it's a great opportunity, very challenging.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. It sounds like you're saying that in a way, coronavirus is pushing the education space to do all the things that many of you have been advocating for all along. Caitlin, I'd love for you to kind of wrap up this conversation before we take questions from the audience. And anybody in the audience who doesn't know about the Luminos Fund, I really urge you to visit their website, see what they're doing. Caitlin is leading amazing work when it comes to educating those who are most vulnerable. Caitlin, I'd love for you to give your thoughts. There have been many comments about how in order for us to take education forward, we need to start seeing a much broader range of partnerships emerge. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about how we can, as those who are in the education space, specifically on the not-for-profit side, how do you move forward, and what kind of partnerships are now something that you can start forging as a result of the coronavirus? And how do we see a lot more regional collaboration? We've seen a lot of countries focus on education, communities focus on education, but this is a global problem. And will we now finally reach a point where we can say we can see a lot more co-creation and co-collaboration that come about as a result of what's been happening now?
Well, that's an awfully big question. Close us out with, Dina. I mean, I think there's two things I'd touch on here. And one, you know, we've heard from a number of panelists. We know even with the COVID crisis itself, this is unlikely to be the only period of school closure that we face just with this particular pandemic. But in the geographies we work in, this is actually our second pandemic in 10 years. So what we're increasingly seeing is that, especially in the poorest countries, there's a need for education systems as a whole that have a different level of resilience and that are prepared to open and close and that are prepared to think expansively about the resources available in any given country context in order to minimize the inequality associated with the opening and closure. And so, you know, for most of the countries in the world, the government is the primary provider of education. That was the case, that will continue to be the case. But governments have an opportunity to think much more expansively about the degree to which civil society can be a tool in helping them reach the most vulnerable children, bring them back into the system, and to do so thoughtfully in a way that, you know, first things first begins with a period of measurement. What learning has been lost in the period? The need for not just sort of summative endline assessment, but really diagnostic assessment to understand what are the gaps and meet children where they are has just never been more important than it is in this time. And then I guess the other thing I'd say that we've learned as we've moved from country to country across the African context is that, you know, education in particular is always plagued by false dichotomies. And I think we tend to be pulled to one pole or the other, that either, you know, education programs must be completely uniform and standardized and rolled out without variation across geographies, or they must be totally and completely custom and specific to a given context. I mean, the private sector would never see this dichotomy. I mean, even McDonald's feels the need to customize by region, right? And so, you know, one of the things we've learned through the experience of moving country to country is that there's 75% of our child-centered pedagogy, which is the same everywhere. But there's a critical 25%, which is totally different and completely unique to that context. And so unless you are co-creating and co-laboring with the communities you serve to adapt a core model, you run the risk of sort of a fanatical adherence to one approach, which is never going to be completely perfect for every geography. So I think that 75-25 ratio is one of the critical things we think about when we think about achieving true scale.
Absolutely. Thank you, Caitlin. All right, I'm going to bring in some questions from the audience. I'm going to ask them quickly, and I'm going to ask people to just respond quickly. One question is, not everyone will have, and we've discussed this, not everyone will have the same level of access to online learning due to very weak infrastructure in certain parts of the world. What are each of you going to be doing to ensure that nobody gets left behind as we move to more virtual learning? And I'm just going to pick on people very quickly, and I'll say for this question, let's see, Mohamed, and I think Caitlin, this is very relevant to you, and I know Vicky, you took yourself off mute, so I'll let you respond very quickly too. All right, very quick responses. Mohamed, you want to go first? Vicky, do you want to go?
Well, as I said before, it's a combination of everything, and we have, you know, we have said we have to go from transmission of knowledge to social construction of knowledge. And this will be a great opportunity using all the forms of technologies, radio, cell phones, ideally also virtual education, our printed self-paced learning guides. But, you know, the whole concept is how you change the act of learning, how you change the time of learning into more self-paced learning. We've been talking about this for ages. And also, as I said before, time and space and the time of learning. So I think these are crucial issues we have to start looking into the essence of education. I don't know if I answered your question, but I wanted to say this. I wanted to highlight.
That's great. Anybody else? Quick response, Madhav?
See, now I think it should be clear to everyone that the internet is not something that the for-profit businesses only can run. It is almost the same level of necessity as roads. So why shouldn't government start providing the internet access? That's the first one. Second question is this: devices are expensive, but sharing of devices is possible. And we are certainly experimenting with digital device libraries and also creating community groups of learners who can share devices, their own and so on. So I think this cooperativity has to go right to the bottom of the society and say, start sharing what you have, not just the knowledge, but the devices as well.
May I just say, this is crucial. The public-private partnership, this is the moment the technology organizations can come into the picture to really support the governments. So this is a great opportunity for public-private partnership.
Yeah, I agree.
I just want to add one quick note. Sorry,
yeah.
Dina.
Go ahead.
I've heard this over so many webinars I've attended over the past month. The reality is the cost of getting access for remote areas and students through technology is far below opening up an actual school and recruiting teachers and sending them every day with transportation and logistics and all of that. So even if the cost is just like buying one device for that family and handing it over, I mean, all these donor agencies would probably save so much money doing that instead of physically investing in schools. And I'm not saying I'm against blended learning and having students at school as well, but I'm just saying it's not as big of a problem as we perceive it to be.
Thank you, Hamdi, and I agree with you. Although I still remain, concerned that we can really do what it takes to ensure that when we do get to those remote areas, we also give them the quality they deserve. Another follow-up questions are, what are some ways teachers can engage with their students in countries where internet is still developing? So even if we do have a government that says we would like to provide internet access, this will take time. So what can teachers do in the interim? Any takers?
Repeat the question, please.
The question is, what are some ways teachers can engage with their students in countries where internet is still developing?
Teachers can continue to do what they do when they can do it better. It's not as though you need internet for everything. You can, if there is no teacher and there's no internet, there's a problem. If there's teacher, then the teacher should be able to teach. So, and this is how it's been going on for the past 200 years. So that should not be a problem. But one thing missing is, in most countries are behind on the digital curve. One of the things they should do is develop their own contextualized content before even the digital connectivity comes. And that's a difficult one, but we know that in our country, as big as it is, content in Indian languages is very difficult to come by. Good content. You just take the textbook and digitize it and give PDF files, and that's it. But real content of learning is unlike what's in Europe and so on, and of course America.
Yeah. Another question is, clearly we see a shift in how learning is being delivered, specifically in MENA. Do you think that we will also see a change in the hierarchy of subjects being delivered? In other words, a shift from focus from science and math to arts, culture, languages. I'm assuming this is to those in the Middle East. So Mohammed, Christine, Deema. Hamad.
Thank you, Dina. Sorry for being cut off, but I mean, again, that's the experience of equality around IT connectivity. It's an answer to your question. It's physical, actually. But anyways, I mean, this brings me a bit to something we didn't focus on, which is higher education, which is interesting because, I mean, if you take a look at how the transformation of working K-12 have been working very well, but I don't see a single university around the world who are currently scratching their heads trying to find what are we going to do with STEM based concentrations. I mean, let me give you an example. In one of our universities, I have around 7,000 studying different med focuses. I mean, the clinical work is essential during this point of time in order for them to graduate. I mean, how can you do clinical work online to a large extent? I mean, there's a huge issue a lot regarding what you call it, technical input-based education that needs your physical presence, whether at a clinic delivering a service or whether at a workshop delivering a product. And these things, you need to find your way around it. So I don't think it's going to affect it. Actually, I see more and more people are focused on STEM education, specifically with a more gender balance. Specifically, you see a lot of women are now more interested to jump into these categories. So I don't see this dogmatic shift. But if we continue going this way, we have to find a different way to approach STEM education all together to a large extent.
Deema.
Yeah, Dina, I think it should change. I mean, take this, what's happening today after the epidemic. What happened is that ministries of education uploaded only the basic topics, which are science and languages, etc. While the elephant in the room is the real need is adaptability, life skills. How do I deal with all this craziness? How do I continue to learn? How do I enjoy learning from a distance? Or many more priorities we need to focus on today, yet we're only thinking of the same things that we used to prioritize. We're still prioritizing. I think moving forward, what really needs to happen is we need to focus on delivering concepts. So knowledge is about delivering concepts, not information. Information is everywhere, anyone can get it. And focus a lot on skills, and the mindset. These are the three things that we need to focus on, and we don't have to have a curricula for everything, a curricula for entrepreneurship, and a curricula for digital skills, and a curricula for emotional intelligence. These can be built, all these skills can be built through the active learning we're talking about, through methods and techniques that focus on them. So we can still deliver the STEAM that we prioritize, but in very different ways and methods to really give attention and focus to the other skills that are needed. But they need to be prioritized in order for us to address these issues. They need to be prioritized. All the other skills need to be prioritized.
Thank you, Deema.
Can I add a very quick comment, Dina? That's
yes,
okay. I honestly think that in a country like Egypt, where 2/3 of the children are actually not able to read and write, I think that also literacy and numeracy will become a very core component of the coming phase, regardless of what curriculums look like, but more programs on literacy and numeracy, because if anything, the gap will only increase. So I think that we should work more on coming up with programs, or actually building up on programs that already exist. For example, like teaching at the right level from Fathom and others, to be able to actually help students, let that be through online or offline methods, to actually pick up on literacy and numeracy, and to help not increase the gap, but to actually help on closing it. That's one end. And the other end is also on social emotional learning, because I think that due to this lockdown, of course, it's going to be highly affecting the students when they come back, both in increased violence, particularly in public school contexts, where parents are mostly illiterate and do not know how to handle students and have not stayed for that long time with their kids. So I really think that moving forward, as was just mentioned, we shouldn't be focusing on what curriculums and what subjects, but more on how do we tackle the social emotional learning of the students, and how do we help them and support them come out of this phase, and help them to actually be literate, be able to have basic numeracy skills while becoming individuals that are healthy.
Thank you, Christine. Another question is, and I apologize, are all of you okay with going a little bit over time?
I have to leave in 10 minutes.
Okay, we'll hopefully wrap up by then. So one question is, do the panelists think that the school year can actually be salvaged, taking into account the disparities of poverty, child-headed households, lack of connectivity and devices? Is there any chance that we can somehow salvage at least this school year, or is it going to be written off? Caitlin, you want to take this one?
I think here is a question where the answer varies a lot by geography. I mean, most school systems run on a Northern Hemisphere school year of a sort of September through June. And for those school systems, we've clearly lost the end of the year. The interesting thing is, what might you do with the summer? And is there an opportunity for an intense program in the July-August timeframe? A lot of this comes down to the timing of reopening. And the developing world has been slow to reopen, but we may find that once it starts moving quickly. And one of the things we found on the back end of the Ebola crisis in Liberia was that, you know, schools had closed abruptly, but they actually reopened just as abruptly. So that question of actually being ready when the reopening happens is critical. There are other school systems, though, that run on a calendar year. And for them, the question is, what do you make of the back half? What do you make of the back half of the year? And certainly, you know, what we've seen in the data from the school closures in New Orleans, for example, on the back end of Hurricane Katrina, was that there was a 6-month period of school closure. And the learning gaps and the differential in learning gaps is still very much visible in that cohort of children as they continue to move through the system. So good news, schools can reopen, and they can probably reopen faster than we think. Bad news is without concerted focus and attention, there will be a sort of perpetual learning level gap that moves through this generation.
Yeah. Thank you, Caitlin. And also, Caitlin, very quickly, somebody's asking if you could just say your website very fast as I ask the next question.
Excellent. LuminosFund.org. It's LUMINOS.
Urge everyone to check it out. Another question is, agree 100% with Hamdi about fresh thinking, thinking differently. Hamdi, what I talked about earlier today at the EdTech conference, what do you think of a WeWork model of shared space for school? In this model, we would need to build more schools, but use the buildings we currently have, and we would not need to build more schools, but use the buildings we currently have in a more efficient way. Students would do a hybrid online-offline model of learning and share the school buildings that already exist more effectively. Food for thought. Any comments from the panel? And I know, Mohamed, you've already explored a little bit with this, but I think this could be an interesting opportunity moving forward. So all thoughts welcome.
If you want to start, okay, I'll start. Look, to be brief from my end, I'm a big believer in blended learning. We are an edtech startup, but we believe that learning is not going to be online, and we value the importance of the human interaction. We also believe in the concept of inverted classroom, where students would actually spend more time learning the things that they need to learn alone at home, whatever, be it watching lessons, taking assessments, etc., and then going to school to do focus groups, workshops, discuss stuff with the teachers, the students, etc. So on a high level, I think this is where education would converge at some point. So we might see a lot of adoption towards EdTech in general, and then it would converge to more of a blended learning model. This WeWork concept could be very interesting, honestly, to utilize space as much as possible, because you might not literally need it from the morning till the afternoon.
Great. Mohamed, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just said I think the idea is actually very practical. We did this during the Syrian refugee crisis in one of our actually schools, and I mean, you know, it's a very recognizable model. We actually created a fully sustainable school in which we took one of our schools, and we have created a blended program in which the morning includes the existing students within the school, and starting in the afternoon we had the Syrian community studying at the school, and they took some common classes between the two sessions, and this program grew. One school that was serving 1,500 students to 3,000 students, including 1,500 refugees in the afternoon and 1,500 students in the morning. And the blending between both sessions have been brilliant. I mean, they take common classes, they do the common activities, the school becomes 100% self-sustainable. It was much cheaper for everybody to provide for, and this have now been in its 5th year, and the model did not need any grants, any support. It was fitting for everyone, and I think it's the future going forward. And we as CIRA, we keep calling for this day and night, saying that we have a lot of premises around, let's try to find a way to work around them in a smarter manner to serve larger portions of students.
Yeah. And then one final question, and I'll let you add your comments and your final remarks, but one final question to the group, and then we'll wrap up. How do we prepare the teachers for what's to come? In other words, if we want to see, as Deema, as you said, more focused on life skills, and as all of you said, as we move to more blended learning models, how are we going to prepare all of our teachers globally for what's to come? Any takers?
We have, okay, may I start?
Absolutely.
one of the things we've always been saying is that the teachers have to live the same methodologies that they will be using with their children. I think at this point, they have to have a combination of all the things we're talking about also. All this blended learning, using the cell phones, learning to use the radio, learning, because at this moment, for example, we're we follow the national curriculum as all countries do and have. So we're sort of making it a little bit lighter, focusing more on the skills. So the teachers are really making adaptations and really doing the real role of the teacher as mentor and orientator. So I think that they have to go through the same experience. So teachers' colleges have to change also the way teachers have to be trained. And I think this is a great opportunity for them to understand what's really going on in the learning process and to focus on the really deep learning.
Deema.
Yes, Dina, just a quick add-on. So obviously teachers need to be trained on active learning. We've said that again and again, and it's very important. They need to switch their roles from being information providers to facilitators and moderators and discussion creators and people who moderate debates and discuss case studies and present. And so the role has to be changed, and this cannot happen unless they get intensive training, unless universities and colleges start providing courses that target teachers with these specific skills. And also one important point, Dina, that I don't think we've mentioned in our discussion today, the assessments, the exams, because eventually we teach what we test. That's the summary of it all. So as long as our tests are testing and assessing information, we will continue to just give intensive information without really looking deeper. So that will be a starting point as well to changing the way we teach and changing the content and changing the priorities. What are testing? What are the exams about?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. There have been a number of questions. There's so many questions, and I apologize.
Can I add another point, Dina?
Yes, very quickly.
Very quickly. I actually think that the teachers, a lot of work needs to be done with the teachers on a human-centered or a humanistic approach. And it's something that Educate Me has been vouching for a long time, because at the end of the day, the teachers are human beings. They like everyone else, they just found themselves in this situation, and it's here to stay. And there are a lot of unknowns to come. As we're saying, we're discussing, it's going to be blended, how it will look like, will it be blended or not. So I think that dealing with this uncertainty is very hard, and so handling the students, not just by building their capacities on how to use technology and how to re-engineer curriculums, which I think are very important, but also on their humanistic side and working on their social emotional aspect and how could they handle the situation, and also by decentralizing some of the solutions for the teachers and leaving them to come up and become part of the solution.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. And sadly, we have to wrap up. There are many, many questions that have been written in the chat boxes, which makes me feel that we need to do a repeat webinar to allow for deeper discussions. But I wanted each of you to wrap up with your final thoughts about moving forward for each of you in the roles that you're playing now in your organization and in the ecosystems that you function in. What is your one hope moving forward in terms of change that will happen in the immediate future, or what change you plan on taking forward in the immediate future? And I'm just going to move in the direction of the boxes on my screen. So Deema, I'll start with you. You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, sorry. Dina, we will continue doing what we've been doing and advocating for in a better way, I hope, and with more knowledge now and experience. We are working on mainstreaming the key skills that we've been talking about, the ones that we believe needs to be mainstreamed. And this is This is our target now, because impact is both quality but also quantity. If we want to achieve the impact we talk about, things need to be mainstreamed within the education system, and this is our focus at Injaz. And I mean, hope is not a strategy, as you know, but yeah, we're working on making it happen.
Madhav?
So I'm not willing to assume that things are going to change, not by themselves. Inertia is a very powerful thing, and the tendency is to go back to normal. Although we all have felt that, you know, oh, we're going to move on and do different things. I very much doubt that. Call me cynical, but I doubt that very much. Unless people like the faces here on the call, people listening, unless they actually start talking about, not only talking about, but doing things actively to say that we need a change. Use this opportunity, and this is a word that came up in the discussion today very often. So start talking about the opportunity, talk about what is ahead of us, and start pushing. If we don't do that, things will just lapse back into where the normalcy was, the old normalcy. I think that would be a big error that we would make. The second thing is the tendency is also to talk about everything else changing and not me. So we want to train the teachers, yes, but how will you become a better trainer? I think we need to become mentors and not trainers. If you want the teachers to become mentors and facilitators, then we need to become mentors. Our whole training system is based on, I will go into the room, train the teachers and walk out. That can't be. So if you want them to become mentors, you become mentors yourselves. So I think this famous thing about be the change that you want to see is really important. It's not just something that Mahatma Gandhi said, something that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madhav. Caitlin?
Well, I think my hope, perhaps rather than my prediction, is that we've all had a unique opportunity to realize that schools are so much more than schools, and places of community, places of socialization, and that our teachers can't do this alone. So I think I think there's an opportunity for all of us, not just as organization leaders, but also as parents, to recognize the role of the broad-based community in supporting the multifaceted role of teachers.
Hamdi?
Yes, a bit contrary to Madhav, I consider myself as an optimist on the other extreme of things. And our focus and hope is one clear thing. We're gonna work as hard as possible to try to get the best quality education to every single student in the Arabic-speaking region.
Fantastic.
I'm an optimist too, Hamdi.
Because you started off saying, consider me a pessimist. This is why I commented.
No, I said cynical.
But I was just joking.
About whether things will happen by themselves. Anyway, good.
Of course. It's just joking with you.
Find opportunities to work together.
Of course.
Sorry.
Christine?
Well, I think, yeah, I think at Educating, we really believe that the role of a teacher is crucial, and I think that we're all out to support the teachers and to ensure that they have what it takes for the coming period, and to be able to reach them in whichever way or form, particularly in the public school context, let that be online or offline. We are definitely considering blended learning, so offering our school transformation journey in a blended learning, in more of a blended learning format. Also in our school, we're also very much considering to build up on the offline toolkits that we've managed to develop, and we plan to even develop more, and also try to advocate for the public schools to be using it, because particularly in public schools in Egypt, the curriculum has stopped and will only start again with the beginning of the academic year. And so that's a whole challenge of its own. And therefore, we really hope that the toolkits that we've done and that even the best practices from Escuela and Nueva that could be used and contextualized in the Egyptian context, I think would be very helpful and are crucial at this stage in building up on those global partnerships partnerships, and of course, private and public partnerships as well.
Thank you, Christine. Vicky?
Well, I guess I'll finalize with the same thing I said at the beginning. This is a great opportunity. I'm an optimist. I think this will force us to come down to the essence of things, to really shift the learning paradigm, to really focus on the child-centered learning, the new role of the teacher, as I said and Madhav has said, as a mentor. And also, I think it will force systems to concentrate more to redouble their efforts for those really isolated children that with less resources, the issue of equity. I think, and of course, bringing the public-private sector into helping reduce inequity in our societies.
Thanks, Vicky. And before moving to Mohamed, I just wanted to wrap up by saying that when Mohamed and I co-founded Ahead of the Curve about a decade ago now, or a little less than a decade ago, we had really had this dream of reimagining all of the different systems that weren't functioning the way that they should, but to really see partnerships emerge to take these different systems forward, to see the private sector step up and to see partnerships between the private sector and public sector emerge to solve challenges in education, in healthcare, and many other sectors. And you know, even from the role I'm sitting in now at MIT as executive director of the Legatum Center, our hope is to really start seeing innovation move to the spaces that matter the most. And with that, because Mohamed holds two hats, one as a co-founder of Ahead of the Curve and Reimagine Group, but also the CEO of Egypt's leading education company. What are your final thoughts, Mohamed, and hopes moving forward when we think about reimagining education?
Dina, you know me, I'm quite a realist. I'm actually not an optimist or a pessimist. It's something I've learned over the past years. So I mean, to be quite frank, I just want to see one thing. I keep telling my team, what I want out of this is what I call it an enhanced stability. I really long to come back to a stable environment. So that's number one. But I mean, if there's three very simple things, if we achieved out of this experience, I think we have moved a mile. One of them is parents who, and this has been said before, and I want to reiterate again, parents who understand what their kids are studying and become part of their studying process. It's very important. Students who finally appreciate the chance of getting an education. It's not for granted, it's not out there, it's not pushed by the public system. The fact that you get a chance to sit in a school and study is a blessing that you need to appreciate, and a lot of them are reviving that. And number three, educators and teachers who are willing to shake the boat a bit, use different technology, apply what they're doing, enhance it, and moving forward. If these three elements are achieved, I tell you, we're going to arrive to a very different position once this crisis is over. It's very realistic, it's down to the point, but it's just speaking the three fundamental cores of how education is being done. This is how I see it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mohamed, and thank you all for joining us, speakers. So many comments of how much people enjoyed this session. This is the last webinar that Ahead of the Curve will be doing during this Ramadan season, and we hope to continue with new topics right after Ramadan ends at the end of May, early June. And with that, I also just really wanted to thank the amazing team at Ahead of the Curve who has put in an enormous effort to bring this webinar series of Reimagining Life to all of you. And Salma Say has asked me to tell you all that the next one will be focused actually on entrepreneurship and innovation post-COVID-19. So hope you will join us again after Ramadan. And to all of you in the Arab world, Ramadan Kareem, I know that it's almost time for all of you to break your fast. So thank you for bearing with us and sticking through this. And we hope to see you all again in the future.
Thank you, Dina, very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dina.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Deema. Bye, Caitlin.
Wonderful meeting. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Madhav. Thank you, Christine.